All right, before we get started, keep in mind that this account was created to provide information on how current immigration laws apply to certain factual scenarios. There are many people, I suspect, who are worried about their immigration situation, but are not sure if they should speak with an immigration attorney. Keep in mind, and I cannot stress this enough, that immigration law is unbelievably fact-specific. So even if you think your situation is nearly identical to the one I'm going to analyze here, you should still reach out to an immigration attorney. Even the smallest factual differences can change everything. That said, this is not legal advice. I'm hoping to merely educate people, as I know that a lot of anxiety exists in certain immigrant communities. Also, immigration laws and procedures will likely change significantly over the next few months. They already have to some extent. So what might be accurate at the time of recording could be outdated in the next few weeks or even tomorrow. So this lady came to the United States in 1998 when she was 9 years old. A family friend drove down to Mexico and she sat in the back seat with the man's other kids. She was not hiding in the car, and when they drove through San Ysidro, the CBP officer did not stop them or ask any questions. He waved them through. She has remained in the United States since that time and has never left. In 2012, she married her U.S. citizen husband, and they have 2 children. They want to know if she can legalize her status. Okay, so we've talked about this type of scenario before to some degree. She would be eligible to get her green card through her husband, but through the waiver process, the I-601A waiver process. That would involve a waiver, obviously, and a trip to Ciudad Juarez, where she would need to process the final step, and she would stay there for probably about a week to 2 weeks. That whole process takes about 4 years, possibly more, maybe a little less, but that's generally the timeline you want to have in mind for that. So obviously it would be better if we could do this case faster and cut out the trip to Mexico. Now, this is a Quilantan case. So what that means is that in general, if a person enters the United States legally and overstays and marries a United States citizen, they can get their green card in the United States. It would take a matter of months, possibly a year, depending on the jurisdiction. If they enter illegally, then the only process they have available is the waiver. Well, Quilantan is sort of a hybrid, okay? So if someone presents themselves at a border, in this case, San Ysidro, and they're not hiding in the vehicle, they're sitting in plain sight, and the officer, instead of asking for their visa or asking for any proof that they're allowed to enter the United States, if the officer just waves them into the United States, that is a lawful entry, okay? They came to the border, the officer decided not to ask them any questions, and they waved them through. They didn't sneak across, they didn't come through the desert, they didn't hide in the trunk of the vehicle, so it's not an illegal entry. Now, obviously, these days, and probably for the last 20 years or so, Quilantan entries are not very common, okay? CBP does not generally wave people through anymore, okay? But in the 90s and even the early 2000s to some degree, those types of entries were pretty common. The big issue is, how do we prove that that's how she came across? She probably doesn't have contact with that family friend from back in 1998. And even if she did, is he really going to be willing to come forth and say, yes, I smuggled someone into the United States? He probably isn't. She might be able to get witnesses that were also in the car. Okay, maybe some of the other kids she was friends with, and they would say, yeah, that's what I remember too, was that we came through and we were just waved through and no one asked for any of our documents. But that's also difficult. So one of the big things that we try to rely on in these cases is a polygraph test. Okay, she was old enough, she was 9 years old, so she probably remembers certain details about that. And we would hire a private polygraph company to perform a polygraph test to make sure that she's telling the truth. This is not a government polygraph test, okay? So it's not that if she fails it, then the government, takes her into custody and tries to deport her. We would get the private polygraph company. If she fails the test, then obviously we're not going to use that as evidence. But if she passes the test and she's telling the truth on how she came in, then we would use that as a way to show that she had a lawful entry, and therefore she's eligible to adjust her status. Quilantan cases are, they're kind of a pendulum type of immigration issue, meaning at certain times the government is approving those cases, but then other times the government decides they're not going to be approving those cases. So you really need to make sure that you are talking to an attorney that is familiar with the current government stance on this type of a case, because it can slide back and forth depending on what administration is in power and what their view is on a Quilantan case. Hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions or need to schedule a time to speak with me, my information's in the bio. You can call us, email us, and we can set up a time. Thank you.